In the dead of night, a group of men, warriors of the Delaware Nation, are preparing, not for battle, but for rest. They have spent days stalking through the hostile and unwelcoming territory of a distant nation, and they have finally made it to the large river that separates the two nations. The river provides life for both nations, and it is agreed that, for now, no blood shall be spilled on these grounds. Without looking back or slowing down, they cross the river to set up a campsite. At last, they are safe. Another half-day's trek, and tomorrow the village will come into view. As they tend to their bodies, resting their sore feet and removing uncomely hairs from their face with specially made tweezers, they hear the call of the sentinel of man, the great owl. A man stands, feet still sore from trekking through the endless expanse of ancient America, and reaches into his tobacco pouch. He grabs a generous fingerful of the aromatic leaf and casts it into the fire. The smoke from the tobacco rises from the fire into the trees before being carried away by the wind. In his native tongue, he says aloud, "Thank you. We are grateful." As people, our habits play a major role in defining not just what we do, but who we are. Today, we are looking at a habit that affects 1 in 5 Americans directly, but indirectly has already affected every American. That habit is smoking, dipping, or vaping. The winds of change are ever present in the sails of humanity's voyage through time. From sacred plant to vaporized concentrate, this 3-part series will attempt to delve into the nuanced history of tobacco in America, providing context for its use. Our journey begins in ancient America and ends in modern day. Okay, a brief side note before we go on with the video. I want to explain what's actually going on in the background of my videos. Feel free to skip ahead if you'd rather just get on with the video. I'll leave a timestamp to that right here. Okay, if you have not skipped ahead, I imagine you might be asking, what does GranTurismo 7, which is a racing simulator, have to do with today's topic, or any of the topics that I might post on this channel? On the surface, absolutely nothing. But what if we gave it a closer look? The topics I cover can sometimes be contentious, sometimes a bit upsetting, or at the least, they showcase some of mankind's epic fails. In that vein, at times, we as people can sometimes get overwhelmed by the misdeeds that we perform. Similarly, the racing can be stressful, and the constant grind can be
frustrating.
There are definitely times where it just feels easier to walk away from this dream I've had of being involved in motorsport. And in regards to YouTube, to just focus on the storytelling and leave the GranTurismo 7 out of it. Or perhaps get better at storytelling and then have a second channel dedicated to just GranTurismo. It makes perfect sense, and trust me, I have thought of it. But maybe I'm just a tad bit unhinged. My wild mind sees this racing simulator and the channel really as a metaphor. The topics are for anyone else like me who is just striving to be slightly better than we were yesterday, to have learned something new or set just a tiny goal and then set out to try and achieve it. Therefore, when I grab the wheel, it's me taking back control of my thoughts and not letting go of my commitment to improvement. I encourage you to find your own personal racing simulator and then check in on me from time to time to see how I'm doing. All right, that's enough of that. If you watched this much, thank you. Let's get back to the video. Let's take a look at the earliest recorded uses of tobacco in America. And of course, that's going to start with the Native American nations. I spent hours scouring through the Library of Congress, various secondary sources, and even obscure websites posted by Great Nation advocacy groups. I was looking to stitch together the social tapestry of what pre-Columbian America was truly like. And what I learned was that the Native nations were a rich and varied people. In some weird twist, the United States is still known for its variation in people and culture. So to gain perspective on the history of tobacco in this country, let's stitch together the social tapestry of what pre-Columbia America was truly like. But let's do it through the eyes of a man named Johann Gottlieb Ernestus HeckWelder. It's a mouthful, but let me tell you, this guy would have been a hell of a YouTuber. Johann, we'll call him John, was a Moravian minister, but he was also a spy for the Americans against the Brits and their allied nations. John HeckWelder was born in England to German Moravian parents and was sent to America at 10 years old to, say it with me, escape religious persecution. In America, he was a reverend and a missionary to members of the indigenous Delaware Nation who lived in 19th century Pennsylvania. His orders were to follow the Great Commission and share the gospel with those who had not yet heard it, while also reporting any movements of enemy nations back to George Washing Machine. John was also a member of the Pennsylvania Historical Society. His unique background and disposition, combined with the point in time wherein he lived, placed him in the seat to become a foremost scholar on the happenings and cultures of many Native nations, particularly that of the Lenape, or Delaware Nation as it's known to us. John authored a historical publication which will be what I pull from mostly when discussing the history of tobacco during this point in time. The name of the publication was called History, Manners, and Customs of the Indian Nations, who once inhabited the land of Pennsylvania and its neighboring states. This publication is actually part of a historical collection that was officially entered into the Library of Congress in 1876. The book serves as an expose into an array of Native American practices, cultures, and beliefs for both large and small nations. A fair majority of the scenes in the book come directly from members of these various Native nations, but some of it he chronicled himself from first-hand accounts, as he could speak the language. This man was dedicated. Without him or others like him, the average American would have no way of possessing this ancient knowledge that traditionally was only passed down orally and was safeguarded by elders and chieftains. In the 1700s and even some of the 1800s, there existed members of Native nations who actively embraced what is termed the old way, or knew of the old way from their parents or grandparents. HeckWelder was a missionary whose task it was to convert these followers of the old way. But after reading almost all of his publication, John's tone is more of admiration and respect, rather than excessive self-assuredness or an out-of-touch zealot. I'm going to lay out a couple of terms for you so we can follow along together. The Great Spirit. He was the almighty creator and the ruler of the Manitos. The Manitos were subordinate spirits of the Great Spirit who were given the rule and command over the elements. Tobacco, for some in the old way, was used in part as a way to appease Manitos as they served their functions given to them by the Great Spirit. For example, if a storm or turbulent weather was approaching, various nations would address the Manito of the air or the Manito of the waters, that it might prevent the swells from rising too high or the winds from uprooting their crops and homes while it was passing over them. In both of these instances, they would show acknowledgement and gratitude for the manito performing its task by throwing tobacco in the air or strewing it on the waters. Are you still with me? Let's speed things up. According to the old way of the Lenape, tobacco was used in religious or spiritual practices like we just mentioned, and it was also used to show gratitude to animals. Animals whose very presence had been documented to have been beneficial. And when I say beneficial, I'm saying that without this animal, people would have been slain right where they lay. The Lenape culture within ancient America acknowledged that the wild animals did not have power over their existence like the great being or manitos. But nations like the Lenape were still largely grateful and respectful to animals, shown through hunting prayers and dedicated ceremonies. HeckWelder transcribed this tale from the native tongue of the Lenape, as he also spoke their language. This allowed them to tell it to him in its most genuine form. It goes like this. It happened one time when the ancestors were engaged in a war with a distant and powerful nation, that a body of their warriors was in the camp, fast asleep, no kind of danger at that moment being apprehended. Suddenly, the great sentinel over mankind, the owl, sounded the alarm. All the birds of the species were alert at their posts all at once, calling out as if saying, "Up, up, danger, danger." Obedient to their call, every man jumped up in an instant, when, to their surprise, they found that their enemy was in the very act of surrounding them, and they would have all been killed in their sleep. So, when in the night, if an owl was heard sounding its note or calling to its mate, some person in the camp will rise and, taking some Indian tobacco, will strew it on the fire, thinking that the ascending smoke will reach the bird and that he will see that they are not unmindful of his services. And yet, more still, the uses of tobacco were varied. When you have guests over for the holidays, or maybe for dinner or for board games, what's the question we almost always ask? I'll give you a moment to wait and think about it. Would you like a glass of water while you wait? That's what we ask. Would you like a glass of water? Well, what did some Native American nations ask their guests? And yes, it involves tobacco. In the times before European influence, a member of a certain Native nation would probably not have even asked if you wanted tobacco. If you were of the age to consume, they would pass you their tobacco pouch for you to imbibe from their stores. This was a sign of gratefulness for the opportunity to look after a guest in their home, the way many people today would almost expect to receive water, or maybe the Wi-Fi password. I think by now, the image is starting to become clear. In ancient America, tobacco was sacred. In times before me, before our parents, before our great-grandparents, and even before their great-grandparents, tobacco was as intertwined with the culture of the Native American nations as the Native American nations were intertwined with the land. And it has been made an iconic part of the Native American caricature that we are all familiar with. Tobacco was used in medicines, peace offerings, social events like powwows, from which we derive our use of the word today. It was used intentionally and almost always in the context of bridging a divide, either between each other or between oneself and the unseen realm. But that was all about to change. There were great and powerful forces in play within and amongst the great nations, even before Europeans first arrived. The most subversive of these forces were fear, greed, and the expansion of territory, all of which still aptly mirror the plight of humanity today. The arrival of Europeans truly served as a catalyst for what some could argue was bound to happen seemingly to any society after it becomes inundated with too much technology or the rate of change is too rapid. The increase in the need for power almost always corresponds to a rapid increase in corruption. I will show you proof of that right now. While HeckWelders' publication goes into detail on Native American spirituality and a wide variety of cultural exchanges, it also reveals some of the great nations' politics and hidden hand agendas by larger and more powerful nations. The politics might have appeared simpler to us today, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the end result, and it's the same as today: bloodshed. One such large and powerful nation was the Mingwe, known to us as the Iroquois. It is recounted in HeckWelders' publication that members of other nations did not call the Iroquois the 5 or 6 great nations, but when not called the Mingwe, they were sometimes called the 5 divisions, implying that perhaps the powerful Iroquois nations were not all completely ideologically aligned together. That's important because at that time, there were members of the Iroquois who contributed ultimately to its nation's own downfall and the overall downfall of a once colorful and widespread culture. HeckWelder writes, "The Delawares and Mohicans agree in saying, conduct of the Iroquois was treacherous and perfidious in the extreme, that it was their constant practice to sally out secretly and commit depredations on the neighboring nations, with intent to involve them in wars with each other. That they will also commit murders on the frontier settlers, from Virginia to New England, and charge the tribes who were settled in the neighborhood with the commission of those crimes. That they, the Iroquois, would then turn negotiators and effect a peace, but always at the expense of the nation whom they had injured. They would sell the lands of other nations to the English and receive the money, pretending to paramount a right to the whole territory. And this, say the Lenape, was their manner of conquering nations. This time of sweeping and all-consuming change after the arrival of Europeans and the introduction of hard liquors brought with it a redefining of the American tobacco plant. Europeans showed Native Americans liquor, and Native Americans showed Europeans tobacco. And thus was the creation of Louisiana gas stations. The increasing role of tobacco as a cash crop in early America led to a shift in the labor force that would eventually begin to shape the life and politics of the American South. By this point, tobacco had lost its old identity and was on track to gain a new one, and the ever-expanding reach of WASP and French immigrants into the New World. So let's take a look at 1920s America. Okay, man, I'm excited. Gentle reminder for people who may not know or have forgotten already, GranTurismo 7 for this channel is a metaphor for just improving. All right, so let's give them some context. Speaking of context, I'm going to give you guys some context for anybody who's never played Gran Turismo or never heard of it. What in the world you're actually looking at on the screen? So in the middle of the screen, top middle of the screen, you'll see the timer. That is the timer for the time trial, keeping account of my actual speed through the lap. It also keeps track of my speed through each sector. And the goal is to string together purple sectors. Purple in this game means you're fast. You're going faster than you were before. And so if you look to the right of the screen, you'll see a rolling tab of numbers. Those numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, are my actual lap numbers. And then there's a time next to each of those lap numbers. The purple one is my fastest lap. So lap 5, my fastest time around Watkins Glen. And this car with this setup was 2 minutes, a second, and some change, 185 milliseconds. So those are really the only two things you really want to pay attention to: the timer in the middle and the lap time on the right, and just kind of track me along that way. The reason why I'm driving this M3 and not a Group 3 car, at least for this instance, is because I need to work on my driving. In motorsport, there's driving and there's racing. Some people are great drivers and they're slow racers. Some people are great drivers, but even better racers. But either way, they're great drivers. So right now I'm working on my fundamentals. And in this video, I'm focusing on my braking. My goal is to see if I can get around Watkins Glen in less than 2 minutes just by focusing on my braking. Let's see if I make that happen. Enjoy.